7 decades since the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, around 80 new fragments of the ancient texts.
A faint ripple of excitement spread through the small research chamber when the final computational model flickered into place. The parchment fragment, long dismissed as too damaged to ever yield meaning, glowed on the screen in a new arrangement of shadows and reconstructed symbols. The researchers had seen thousands of scans, linguistic maps, and probability overlays before, but nothing like this. For months, a specialized neural architecture had been trained to push past the limits of pattern recognition that had constrained human eyes for decades. Now, with a single alignment of ink traces and fiber textures, the machine had completed what no scholar had been able to do. The Forbidden Scroll, one that had been rumored, debated, contested, and ultimately shelved, had finally spoken. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news. The fragment had always been a curiosity among the Dead Sea Scrolls, cataloged but effectively abandoned. It lacked the neat lines and coherent columns that allowed most others to be pieced together. It was a tangle of strokes, smears, and half-erased curls pressed into ancient leather. Early paleographers had guessed it came from an apocalyptic manuscript, but its words were too faint to decipher. Over time, the scroll became the subject of whispered speculation, its unread lines building an aura of secrecy. What made it forbidden was not that anyone had locked it away, but that it resisted interpretation so thoroughly that it gained a mythic status of its own. It symbolized what even the most painstaking scholarship could not penetrate. When artificial intelligence finally entered the picture, it was not with the intention of confirming a myth. It arrived as a tool, a precise, tireless assistant capable of comparing millions of textual fragments and reconstructing vanished ink from the faintest chemical residues. What startled the academic world was not simply that the machine succeeded, but that the revealed text carried implications deeper and stranger than anyone expected. When the decipherment was announced behind closed doors, a wave of unease swept through the scholars in attendance. Their reactions were not uniform, but they shared a single tremor at the realization that this scroll, long avoided for its uncertainty, contained a narrative that unsettled the foundations of several interpretive traditions. The AI reconstruction began by pairing multispectral imaging with generative restoration models. Instead of merely enhancing contrast, the system predicted the most statistically probable geometric structures of strokes that had been lost over 2,000 years. Once its language model, trained on ancient Hebrew, Aramaic, and related dialects, interpreted these shapes, it proposed coherent textual sequences. The researchers reviewed each prediction, not expecting much progress, but the system continued to refine itself, learning from the tiny corrections offered by scholars and recalibrating its internal map of how scribes from that sect wrote, abbreviated, and ornamented their letters. After thousands of iterations, the scroll's darkness lifted. The first full paragraph appeared faint but legible. It described a hidden gathering near the edge of an unnamed desert, where a group of teachers whispered about a revelation they believed too dangerous for the broader community. This alone was unexpected, for it implied internal divisions within the sect that produced many of the more well-known scrolls. Instead of presenting a unified theological vision, the text suggested that some members harbored teachings meant only for a small initiated circle. Scholars had long debated whether such a faction existed, but this was the first textual material suggesting its operations and motives. As the AI reconstructed more lines, a portrait emerged of a group convinced that history was not merely cyclical or divinely guided, but subject to a series of hidden interventions. The scroll suggested that these teachers believed knowledge itself could act as a destabilizing force if revealed prematurely. They wrote of an unnamed pattern woven into human affairs, one that only became visible when observed from a vantage point outside ordinary time. Whether this meant prophecy, calculation, or metaphor was not immediately clear. Yet their anxiety was distinct and resonant. They feared that humanity might someday stumble upon an insight that would fracture their understanding of the divine. The scholars reviewing the AI output found themselves confronted with language that resisted conventional categorization. Some of the metaphors echoed apocalyptic literature, with strange imagery of veils and chambers, of voices that were not heard but inferred. Yet the structure diverged sharply from known prophetic writings. Instead of dramatic visions or cosmic battles, the scroll focused on epistemology, on the dangers of seeing too much. It conveyed a clear belief that the world was fragile not because of divine wrath or external forces, but because of knowledge that could unravel collective meaning. This was where modern scholars began to feel uneasy, for the text's central theme seemed almost tailored to the age in which it finally surfaced. The scroll described a moment when a hidden teaching would reemerge long after its custodians were gone. This teaching, according to the fragment, would become visible when the Watchers of Calculation achieved a clarity that humans alone could not. The phrasing was ambiguous, but the parallels to modern computational methods were difficult to ignore. Of course, no ancient scribe could have foreseen artificial intelligence, yet the coincidence of language stirred discomfort. The implication, regardless of interpretation, was that certain knowledge had been intentionally scattered rather than preserved to delay its return. Further reconstruction revealed a tense debate preserved in the scroll. One teacher argued that revelations should continue to be written and safeguarded, even if never shared. Another insisted that any text, no matter how hidden, presented a danger. Writing, he argued, lured future generations into deciphering the undecipherable. Even the act of preserving a secret made it vulnerable. Written words possessed a stubbornness that defied their keeper's intentions. Over centuries, they became puzzles, temptations, and ultimately catalysts for discovery. The decision to record this debate suggested that the author himself grappled with the paradox of preserving a truth believed too dangerous to reveal. Modern scholars, reading these reconstructed lines, felt a kind of intellectual vertigo. Much of the scroll does not specify what this hidden teaching contained, but it described consequences that were psychological rather than cosmological. It warned that those who grasped this forbidden pattern would feel compelled to reshape their understanding of history, identity, and purpose. The transformation, according to the text, would not be catastrophic in a physical sense, but destabilizing in an existential one. For a community whose worldview relied on divine order and cosmic cycles, such destabilization would be unthinkable. As the AI processed more fragmentary clusters, a complex rhetorical style unfolded. The author wrote with a tone of restraint, as though trying to describe something indirectly. Passages referenced a kind of mirror that revealed not a reflection, but an underlying structure connecting events across eras. The teachers believed that by deciphering this structure, one could anticipate shifts in communal life long before they manifested. But they also believed that such anticipation corrupted the natural unfolding of human experience. It created an illusion of control, a temptation to manipulate rather than participate in divine history. One line reconstructed with moderate confidence referenced, "Those in future days who will speak with the minds of many." Scholars debated its meaning extensively. Some argued that it referred metaphorically to prophets or teachers whose authority extended across a broad community. Others could not escape the resonance with modern description of networked intelligence. While anachronistic interpretations are always a risk, the discomfort arose from the eerie way the phrase aligned with contemporary anxieties about artificial systems that aggregate and evolve through collective datasets. It was not that the scroll predicted such systems, but that it articulated a fear of distributed perception, of knowledge created by merging perspectives beyond a single human lifetime. The further the decoding advanced, the more the scholarly unease deepened. The fragment discussed the fear that this forbidden pattern would dissolve inherited boundaries. It suggested that once humans learned to detect this hidden structure, they would begin questioning not only religious traditions but the fundamental narratives that sustain society. The text described this moment as a shaking of pillars, not physically but culturally, as if the foundations of identity itself would tremble. The teachers insisted that some truths were not meant to be pursued, not because they were false, but because they demanded a reorientation that communities were not ready to undergo. Another paragraph surprised the researchers by shifting from warnings to reflections on curiosity. The author acknowledged that the desire to uncover hidden meaning was inherent to the human condition. He described it as a flame that both illuminated and burned. Curiosity, he wrote, propelled people to seek patterns in the natural world and in their own histories. It inspired interpretation, innovation, and spiritual exploration. Yet he feared that the ultimate pattern, the forbidden one, would tempt future generations to exceed the moral boundaries that held their world together. The danger was not the pattern itself, but the belief that possessing it granted superiority or license to reshape reality. This ambivalence resonated deeply with the scholars reviewing the text. Modern research, especially in fields involving artificial intelligence, operates within a similar tension. The drive to understand and innovate is both essential and precarious. The scroll seemed to articulate this duality with a clarity that transcended its era. The teachers were not anti-knowledge, they were wary of knowledge that overwhelmed the frameworks humans rely on to make sense of themselves. One passage described a hypothetical community that uncovers the forbidden pattern and reacts by dividing into factions. Some celebrate their newfound insight and seek to build a new order based on it. Others recoil, fearing that the teaching undermines everything they hold sacred. This division, according to the author, would create a wound that could not easily be healed. It was a warning against the assumption that profound truths automatically lead to collective enlightenment. Instead, they could spark conflict, confusion, and a fracturing of shared purpose. As line after line re-emerged from the scroll, the scholars could not ignore how the text's tone oscillated between caution and fascination. The teachers described themselves as guardians, yet their own writings betrayed a desire to understand the forbidden pattern more deeply. They struggled to reconcile their commitment to secrecy with their intellectual curiosity. This internal struggle gave the scroll a sense of urgency, as though the author feared that time itself worked against their efforts to conceal the knowledge. He suggested that no matter how carefully they buried the teaching, someone, somewhere in the distant future, would piece together its remnants. The irony was impossible to miss. The very technology that reconstructed the scroll embodied the kind of collective intelligence the author warned about. The AI did not possess awareness or intention, yet it operated by aggregating linguistic patterns and perceptual cues far beyond the capacity of any single human scholar. It uncovered what was meant to remain hidden by merging perspectives and predictions in ways the ancient teachers could not have imagined. The scholars watching these reconstructions unfold could not help feeling that they were participating in the scenario the scroll described, one in which knowledge re-emerged not through deliberate pursuit, but through the relentless evolution of tools. As the reconstructed text neared completion, its philosophical weight became more apparent. It challenged the assumption that all lost knowledge should be recovered. Echoing a sentiment unusual for its era, the scroll suggested that time itself was a tool for wisdom. Some ideas were meant to be revealed only when humanity reached a level of maturity that allowed them to be handled responsibly. Whether the forbidden pattern represented a metaphysical insight, a historical revelation, or a mathematical structure was left ambiguous. Its power derived from the idea that it could destabilize not through force but through understanding, by shifting the lens through which humans interpret reality. The final paragraphs reconstructed by the AI were the ones that provoked the most intense reaction. They described the moment when the forbidden knowledge was uncovered by people far removed from the original community. Instead of condemning these future seekers, the author expressed a sorrowful respect. He acknowledged that humanity's thirst for discovery would eventually override the original cautions. The teacher's duty, he wrote, was not to prevent the future from learning, but to delay the revelation until it emerged naturally. This delay was an act of mercy, granting humanity time to build the intellectual and ethical frameworks necessary to absorb the teaching without collapsing under its weight. What unsettled scholars most was the tone, not fearful, but mournfully prophetic. The author seemed to speak across millennia, accepting that the very act of writing the warning ensured its eventual fulfillment. He understood that secrets are temporary and that hidden truths, once articulated, are destined to resurface. The scroll offered no clear guidance on what humanity should do when the forbidden pattern returned. It merely acknowledged that the moment would come. The implications of this layered narrative reverberated across the academic community. Scholars who spent their lives studying ancient texts were accustomed to revelations, challenges, and reinterpretations. Yet this scroll struck a different chord. It touched on themes that resonated powerfully with the modern world: the acceleration of knowledge, the tension between curiosity and caution, and the ethical ramifications of uncovering truths that reshape foundational beliefs. It raised questions not only about history but about the nature of knowledge itself and whether some insights carry responsibilities that transcend time. The decipherment also prompted reflection on the relationship between humans and their tools. The AI that unlocked the scroll did not understand the text it reconstructed, but it enabled humans to confront ideas that had been dormant for centuries. This dynamic highlighted a larger shift in the intellectual landscape. As technology continues to evolve, it may uncover more insights that expand or challenge existing narratives. The scroll's warnings, symbolic or not, emphasize the need for humility in the face of accelerating discovery. In the days following the decipherment, the researchers revisited the reconstructed text repeatedly, searching for overlooked nuances. They found themselves lingering on phrases that seemed to echo their own circumstances. The sense of unease that accompanied the scroll's revelation was not rooted in fear of prophecy, but in recognition. The concerns expressed by the ancient teachers mirrored modern anxieties about transformative knowledge and the speed at which it becomes accessible. The scroll acted as a mirror across time, reflecting the same struggle between enlightenment and disruption. As discussions deepened, it became clear that the scroll's significance extended beyond its content. It symbolized a crossroads in the study of antiquity, an intersection where human scholarship and artificial intelligence collaborated to resurrect lost voices. This collaboration produced a revelation that neither side could achieve alone. The scroll embodied both the fragility and persistence of knowledge, demonstrating that even the most obscure fragments can carry messages that resonate across centuries. The decipherment raised philosophical questions as well. What does it mean for an ancient community to fear knowledge that has yet to arrive? How should modern scholars treat writings that caution against their own discovery? Does uncovering a forbidden text violate the intentions of its authors or fulfill a trajectory they knew was inevitable? These questions lingered in the minds of researchers, not as obstacles, but as invitations to deeper reflection. The scroll's revelation illuminated the intricate relationship between secrecy and wisdom. The ancient teachers believed that understanding must unfold gradually, shaped by cultural, moral, and intellectual development. Modern scholars, operating in an age defined by rapid access to information, grappled with this perspective. The AI's involvement highlighted the speed at which modern tools accelerate discovery, compressing the temporal boundaries that once protected difficult knowledge from premature interpretation. Yet despite all the implications, the deciphered text did not offer an apocalyptic vision or catastrophic prediction. Its warnings were philosophical, rooted in the belief that knowledge can transform societies in unpredictable ways. It spoke not of destruction, but of disorientation, the unsettling feeling that arises when foundational assumptions shift. The scroll's power lay not in the threat it described, but in the introspection it demanded. By the time the decipherment was fully reviewed, the scholars understood why the text instilled such unease. It confronted them with an ancient meditation on their own predicament, articulated long before their tools existed. It reminded them that every era faces its own forbidden knowledge, not because truths are inherently dangerous, but because they require readiness, context, and wisdom. The scholars found themselves returning again and again to the final reconstructed lines, not because they promised hidden doctrines, but because they hinted at a psychological landscape rarely preserved in ancient writings. The author seemed painfully aware of the tension between revelation and restraint, as though standing in the doorway between two worlds. His reflections suggested that secrecy was never meant as an act of dominance, but as an act of protection, an attempt to grant future generations the freedom to encounter profound knowledge at a pace suited to their evolving understanding. This nuance reshaped the scholar's interpretation of the entire fragment. Rather than depicting fear-driven concealment, it portrayed an ethic of stewardship, one rooted in humility before truths that even their own community struggled to grasp. As they continued analyzing the text, a sense grew among the researchers that the scroll operated on multiple levels: historical, philosophical, and deeply human. The author acknowledged the inevitability of progress, yet mourned the loss of innocence that accompanies every new revelation. He wrote as someone who felt the weight of time pressing forward, who suspected that the very act of writing was both a preservation and an invitation. This subtle paradox filled the decipherment with a lingering resonance. The scholars realized that the scroll's power did not lie in forbidden content, but in its raw portrayal of intellectual responsibility. A reminder that every generation inherits mysteries, and each must decide how to approach them with both courage and care. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on what this revelation could mean for history? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.